Hi gang, the Space Marines of Warhammer 40,000 are organised into over 1,000 independent chapters, spread across the galaxy, each able to commit their forces to wherever they feel they're most needed. But below that basic division, each of the Astartes warriors within them is part of a highly detailed and organised structure, laid out in the holy Codex Astartes, that details their roles, company markings and equipment loadout. So, let's delve into the Codex and find out just how a Space Marine chapter is organised. And if you'd like to support the channel, like and subscribe, or stay tuned at the end for some details of merch and affiliate links. The famed treatise that lays out the organisational doctrines of the Space Marines is known as the Codex Astartes, penned by Robute Guilliman in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and intended to lay out a reliable plan for the structure, tactics and maintenance of the ideal Space Marine force. The Codex Astartes is a massive tome prescribing in detail the strategic and tactical doctrines of the Space Marines, and containing details on approved logistics management, equipment specifications, deployment techniques, camouflage markings, and numerous philosophical treatises about the role and duties of Space Marines within the Imperium. It was actually started midway through the Heresy as a way of Guilliman recording and distributing his wisdom, and then morphed post-Heresy into a kind of handbook for the new Space Marine chapters that sprang up in its wake. In fact, the Codex Astartes is the document that lays out that Space Marines should operate as chapters. But the part that the Codex is most well known for is its recommendations and stipulations over the organisation of a Space Marine chapter, from the correct loadout and the roles of individual squads, to their markings and heraldries, to their organisation into companies and the responsibilities of their commanders. In fact, so well known are its stipulations that chapters that cleave very closely to them are often described as Codex-compliant chapters. There is a defined way in which a Codex-compliant Space Marine chapter is expected to function, one that can be explained and laid out, and which most chapters in the Imperium at least broadly follow. However, that statement of course implies that there are many chapters that don't do that. The Codex was never intended as a hard and fast set of rules, but more a set of guidelines that chapters might benefit from, and given when it was written, it was only the latest of many different organisational structures used by Space Marines over their history of service to the Imperium. The Adeptus Astartes was originally conceived not as independent chapters, but as 20 vast legions, each hundreds of thousands strong, and organised according to the Imperial Principia Bellicosa, a system that had already been in use during the Unification Wars on Terra. In this, one of the first ways in which a legion was broken down would be into large formations known as chapters, originally designated as a formation of 1,000 Marines led by a warrior of the equivalent rank to Lord Commander. Below this, each chapter was split into battalions, 2 per chapter of 500 Marines each, led by a lieutenant commander, and then into companies of around 100 Marines, led by a company captain, before reaching the level of individual squads, each between 10 and 20 Marines strong. That was the original guiding plan, but in practice, many legions diverged considerably from that. That structure was ill-suited to the size that the legions would attain during the Crusade. The original 20 legions that set out from Terra into the darkness of space were modest affairs, their size limited by the recruitment pool and gene seed available on Terra. But once the legions rediscovered their Primarchs, their gene reserves were bolstered, and by recruiting heavily from their Primarchs' homeworlds, the scale of many legions soared to include hundreds of thousands of battle brothers. Some legions would field companies that were up to 1,000 Marines strong. The preferences of each Primarch and the local culture of the new recruits also played a part. Rank titles would vary dramatically across the legions. For example, the rank of Lord Commander was supplanted by many local equivalents: Magister in the Thousand Sons, Noyan Khan in the White Scars, Warsmith in the Iron Warriors, and while they all held the same rank on paper, their actual responsibilities and commands in their respective legions might be quite different. The Emperor's Children, for example, only retained 2 Lord Commanders, each in overall command of half of the entire legion. Some legions dispensed with the chapter and company system entirely, reorganizing themselves into millennials, great or grand companies, brotherhoods or hordes as they wished, and these companies were often extremely specialized. With the scale of war the legions engaged in during the Crusade, whole companies, battalions, or chapters might be dedicated to one specific aspect of warfare. Recon companies, assault chapters, all of those could be common depending on the culture of the legion. While the Great Crusade was ongoing, this wasn't really an issue. Legions tended to fight on their own, and issues of rank or organizational preference would only come up when multiple legions needed to work together. But in the wake of the Horus heresy, a slightly different approach was needed. In the aftermath of the heresy, with the traitor legions hounded into the Eye of Terror by the victorious loyalists, the Space Marine legions were reorganized. Robute Guilliman, at the head of his Ultramarines Legion, had finally managed to break through the warp storms conjured by Horus and arrived to sweep Terra clear of the rebels. The Ultramarines, exiled on the other side of the galaxy for much of the conflict, had not been as depleted as many of the other loyal legions, and so Guilliman's forces, already massive by the standards of a legion, were everywhere in the wake of the heresy, holding the Imperium together through force of arms. From this position of power, the Primarch imposed sweeping changes on the armed forces of the Imperium, partly to make sure that no one legion commander would ever be able to control so much of the Imperium's military might as Horus once had, but also as part of a general shift in priorities from constant crusading expansion to consolidation and defense. The second founding split the remaining legions down into individual chapters according to the guidelines of Guilliman's new Codex Astartes. Each chapter would be a formation of around 1,000 Marines, split down into 10 companies of 100 Astartes each, alongside various specialist support arms, each chapter a totally independent organization with its own fleet, recruitment systems, and high command, and either stationed across the galaxy at strategically important points or based in a roving fleet. I have a full video on the second founding here, listing all the chapters that we know were created, but generally this resulted in a removal of many of the more specialist units that the Legion structure had contained, with a preference towards 3 unit types that were the bedrock of the old Space Marine infantry companies: the flexible, bolter-armed tactical squad, the jump pack-equipped assault squad, and the heavy support squad armed with heavy weapons, which would become known as a Devastator squad. This new structure would remain for the next 10,000 years, though, as with the legions, there was a fair amount of differentiation. Some legions had split themselves down into chapters as requested, but never really accepted the rest of the Codex Astartes, and they kept to their own pre-heresy systems of organization. Others, over time, and especially after the fatal wounding of Guilliman, which saw him confined to a stasis bubble for the next 10,000 years, grew to see the Codex Astartes as a holy document, cleaving so closely to its strictures that their organization became way more rigid and inflexible than Guilliman had ever intended. And lots of chapters, while broadly following the Codex, allowed local culture, available resources, the particular characteristics of their gene seed, or the stated aims and equipment of their founders to influence their organization, creating unique rank structures and veteran units, or swinging the chapter towards one specific preferred method of warfare. The Dark Angels' unique obsession with the Fallen led to them and their successors retaining their ancient Deathwing and Ravenwing formations. The Blood Angels and their successors' gene seed flaws were codified into their Death Company. The close brush with extinction suffered by the Raptors led to their famed secrecy and preference for covert operations, while the industrial might of their homeworld of Lorin Alpha led to the Fire Angels' preference for mechanized warfare. But the third great change in the organization of Space Marines would come with the return of Robute Guilliman at the end of the 41st millennium and the introduction into the chapters of Primaris Space Marines. These Primaris Marines, developed over the intervening millennia by Belisarius Cawl, were deployed with an entire new suite of varied equipment, arms and armor to suit many different roles, many more than the standard chapter had made use of for the last 10 millennia. Intercessor, Infiltrator, Incursor, Reaver, Eliminator, and Suppressor configurations, alongside many others, became viable loadouts for Space Marine units, and this led to another reorganization, with chapters defining their battlefield roles much more generally, and with individual units swapping between various equipment loadouts depending on the requirements of the coming campaign. And that leads us to the organization and insignia of the Space Marine chapters at the dawn of the 42nd millennium, a system partly derived from the Codex Astartes, partly from 10 millennia of tradition, and partly from the recent reforms of Guilliman and Call, all mixed together in different ways depending on the chapter in question. At its core, the Codex's stipulations on chapter and company size have remained roughly the same. A Space Marine chapter is comprised of around 1,000 Space Marine battle brothers, organized into 10 companies of around 100 Space Marines, overseen by a chapter high command staff and assisted by various specialist chambers and sub-organizations. Each chapter will have a specific color scheme, and the main force of the chapter, including its commanders, will be clad in that scheme, including the chapter's symbol, which is usually placed on the left shoulder pad. The Codex does make allowance for camouflage schemes if necessary, but the chapters that use them usually retain one shoulder pad painted in the original scheme. Each of the 10 companies is composed of a number of squads, and each squad will have been assigned a fixed battlefield role and then might swap between different equipment loadouts within that role. The 5 defined battlefield roles within a Space Marine chapter are Command, containing much of the chapter's high command staff, as well as many of its specialists. It's common in many chapters for company-level officers, like captains, to lead a small unit of company veterans who serve as their advisors and honor guard, and they also count as being part of the command role, officially taking on the symbol of a skull on the right shoulder pad. Veterans comprise the chapter's most experienced battle brothers, who are often equipped with rare and ancient arms and armor, or more flexible and idiosyncratic equipment choices, each warrior having their own preferences. In a traditional chapter, veteran squads would have been organized either as stern guard with ranged weapons, or vanguard squads with assault weapons and jump packs, or entrusted with ancient Terminator armor and fielded as Terminator or Terminator assault squads, and in a modern chapter, those squad loadouts might be augmented by veteran intercessor squads and by blade guard veterans equipped with swords and boarding shields. Veteran squads are denoted by this cross symbol. To remain tactically flexible, the vast majority of the chapter would be assigned to the battle line role. In a traditional chapter, this would have meant tactical squads, armed with bolt guns and small squad support weapons, but with the introduction of Primaris Marines, that role has been expanded. Intercessor squads are the mainstay of Primaris chapters, flexible units armed with various sorts of bolt rifle, and those might be supported by heavy intercessor squads in Gravis armor, or swap their standard power armor for the lighter Phobos armor and enter battle as infiltrator squads. Battle line squads are usually denoted by an upward-facing arrow. Close assault has always been one of the more flexible battlefield roles, and close assault squads have always swapped between a few different jobs. In a traditional chapter, this was dominated by the assault squad, 10 Astartes armed with melee weapons and pistols, and usually born into battle by jump packs, but the warriors of such a squad could also be designated as a bike squad, or as pilots for a land speeder squadron, its warriors crewing all those vehicles. Or, in rarer cases, they might be equipped with Centurion warsuits as a Centurion assault squad. With the introduction of the Primaris Marines, the close assault role has almost doubled in size, with the addition of the chainsword-armed Assault Intercessor Squad, heavier jump troops in the form of the Gravis-armed Inceptor Squads, and fire support from short-ranged Infernus Squads, as well as Primaris close assault squads crewing squadrons of Storm Speeders, Invader ATVs, or riding Outrider bikes. When they're equipped with Phobos armor, that close assault squad might function as covert snipers in an Incursor Squad, or advanced terror troops in a Reaver squad. Close assault is denoted by this 4-pointed arrow. The battlefield role of fire support comprises the heavier, man-portable weapons of the chapter. A fire support unit would have traditionally been equipped as a Devastator squad, armed with 4 heavy weapons, or occasionally equipped with Centurion warsuits to make a Centurion Devastator squad, but with the introduction of Primaris Marines, fire support unit configurations now include the plasma-armed Hellblaster squads, melter-equipped Eradicator squads, missile launcher-equipped Desolator squads, the heavy Gravis armor-equipped Aggressor squads, and the much lighter Phobos-equipped Eliminator and Suppressor squads. And their symbol is usually an upturned V shape. The Codex Astartes assigns the battlefield role symbol to the right shoulder pad of the Space Marine, though this is very, very changeable. Even Codex-compliant chapters often vary the positioning or style of those symbols. One individual squad, assigned say as battle line, might find itself rotated through many of those different unit loadouts during the course of a campaign, though with a few exceptions, first-spawn Marine units tend to stick to the pre-Primaris squad loadouts of Tactical, Assault and Devastator, while Primaris Marines are almost always organised using the newer squad formats. This might mean that a Primaris-only chapter simply does not field tactical squads at all, or that a mixed chapter slowly starts to field more Hellblaster and fewer Devastator squads as time goes on, their first-spawn Marines either crossing the Rubicon Primaris, dying in battle, or ascending into the ranks of the veterans. The exact makeup of which squads are fielded by which chapter is dependent on lots of things, not least the preferences of each of their company captains. As I said, a chapter is comprised of 10 companies, and these companies all have a specific role within the chapter organisation and their own command staff and heraldry. Each of the 10 companies of the chapter is led by a company captain, a warrior with decades or centuries of service, who's accompanied by a small unit of company veterans to serve as his command squad. This often includes the roles of company champion, the finest swordsman in the company, often serving as a bodyguard to his captain, and the company ancient, a warrior of proven heroism who's permitted to carry the company's standard. This command staff might then be augmented by warriors drawn from other parts of the chapter who provide specialist skills. It would be normal for each company to have its own assigned chaplain and apothecary, and very common for it to be accompanied by psychers from the Librarius or tech marines from the Armoury. And a company might also include dreadnoughts, warriors who've been interred in a dreadnought suit after suffering a great injury, though it's rare for any company to have more than a couple of these. A full-strength company fields 100 Astartes Battle Brothers, organised into between 10 and 20 squads of between 5 and 10 Marines, each of which is led by a sergeant. Sergeants with lots of experience might attain the rank of veteran sergeant, which in some chapters means that they've fought in the first company or have the right to fight in the first company, and it's also normal for a company to include 2 lieutenants, each of which could, in theory, lead half of the company as a demi-company. In Codex-compliant chapters, sergeants are designated by a red helmet, veteran sergeants by a red helmet with a white stripe, and lieutenants by a regular helmet with a red and white stripe on it, but in practice that's also one of the most commonly changed of the insignia. Many chapters just use broadly similar schemes with different colours, or armorial devices like a centered skull to designate squad leaders. According to the Codex, each company is assigned a company color and a symbol, the color applied to the shoulder pad trim of the Space Marine, and a squad number from 1 to 20, which is traditionally superimposed on the right shoulder pad on top of their battlefield role symbol, though again, that's one of the most frequently modified. Either of these, company color or squad number, might be shown on other bits of the armor, frequently on the knee pads, especially when the squad's been equipped with a mark of armor that doesn't have shoulder pad trim. The first company of the chapter is the Veteran Company, comprised of the most experienced warriors of the chapter, organised into between 10 and 20 squads, all with the veteran battlefield role. Beyond that, the breakdown of squads might be influenced by the preferences of their captain or the veterans themselves, or just by the equipment that's available. Terminator armor, for example, is the sole domain of the first company, though it's rare that a chapter will have enough Terminator suits to equip the whole veteran company at once. The captain of the first company is often the de facto second in command of the chapter below the chapter master himself, and will often be the successor for command of the chapter in the event of the chapter master's death, and the first company captain holds the rank of Master of the Keep, which means that he will be responsible for the defense of the chapter's homeworld if the chapter master is deployed to battle. The trim of the first company is white in a Codex-compliant chapter, with many veterans also wearing white helmets or white surcoats or loincloths. The second, third, fourth, and fifth companies of the chapter are then designated as battle companies, and are tactically flexible forces that usually form the core of any of the chapter's deployments. Assuming all the squads are at 10-man strength, these battle companies consist of 6 battle line squads, 2 close assault squads, and 2 fire support squads, and then below that squad composition is just as flexible as always. Those 60 battle line Marines might be fielded as 2 10-man firstborn tactical squads and 4 10-man Primaris intercessor squads, or as 12 5-man intercessor squads, or whatever other combinations required based on preference, manpower, and mission. 10-man squads of Astartes are even frequently split down further on the battlefield into 2 5-man combat squads. The whole point of the battle companies is to be as flexible as possible and provide a core to any deployment that can handle any potential threat. The second battle company traditionally uses yellow or gold trim, and its captain holds the rank of Master of the Watch, heavily involved in the defense of the chapter's home system and the civilian population of its home world. The third company has the heraldic colour of red, and its captain holds the rank of Master of the Arsenal, responsible for ensuring the stockpiles of weapons and war material available to the chapter. The fourth company is trimmed with green, and its captain will hold the rank of Master of the Fleet, an extremely important title, in command of the proper deployment, maintenance, and staffing of whatever spaceships the chapter holds. And finally, the fifth battle company will be trimmed in black, and its captain will hold the rank of Master of the Marches, which oversees the logistics and supplies required to deploy the chapter's warriors. Below this, the 6th to 9th companies are known as reserve companies, each dedicated to one specific battlefield role. Reserve companies are sometimes deployed en masse if the situation calls for a specific application of firepower, but are much more commonly assigned to other companies. A deployment of the second company might include additional elements from the reserve companies that are used to augment certain battlefield roles, or serve as reinforcements, or garrison troops, or just to bolster their numbers. The 6th and 7th companies are reserve battle line companies. As well as the usual company command elements, their 100 battle brothers are entirely equipped as battle line units. The 6th company's heraldry is orange, and its company captain is the Master of Rites, overseeing many of the rites and rituals of the chapter, as well as posting an honor guard from their company to the chapter's reclusiam. The 7th company's heraldry is purple, and its captain holds the rank of Chief Victualler, another logistical role in command of non-armament provisions, as well as the provision of serfs and servitors. The 8th company of the chapter is an entire reserve close assault company, its 100 Marines exclusively equipped as close assault squads, and its units are often assigned to speeder or bike crew in support of all the other companies. Its heraldic colour is grey, and the 8th captain is accorded the role of Lord Executioner in charge of the enactment of discipline within the chapter. And then the 9th company is the reserve fire support company. Its 100 Marines are exclusively equipped as fire support squads. The company colour there is blue, and the 9th captain also serves as the chapter's Master of Relics, guarding and overseeing the deployment of the chapter's technological marvels. It's worth stating here that while these are the traditional roles that the captains of the 10 companies hold according to the Codex, individual chapters, of course, have their variations. The White Scar's 4th company captain is the Master of the Hunt, for example, charged with tracking down enemies who've escaped the chapter, and the Executioners call their 2nd company captain the Master of Blades. Finally, the 10th company is the chapter's scout company and the home of the chapter's neophytes and newest recruits. Given the nature of the armour fielded by the units within it, there's no trim colour assigned to the 10th, and the 10th captain holds 2 ranks, Master of Recruits and Master of Reconnaissance, and because of that, the 10th company's size can vary a lot. In a traditional chapter, the Marines assigned to this company would be the newest Astartes of the chapter, neophytes still going through the final part of their training, and who therefore lack the black carapace, the final implant that allows a Space Marine to control a suit of power armour. Because of that, they'd be deployed as scout squads, infiltrators and snipers clad in lighter scout armour while they complete their training. While nominally still 100 strong, in reality there's no effective limit to the size of the 10th company. Death in training is relatively common, and so many chapters might have had overstrength scout companies. But since the introduction of the Primaris Space Marines, the 10th company has been made much bigger. In a Primaris chapter, the 10th is designated a Vanguard company. That is comprised of 100 full battle brothers equipped in any of the unit types that utilize Phobos power armor, regardless of the battlefield role. However, In addition to this full company strength, the 10th also still includes all the neophytes arranged into their scout squads while they complete their training, which will often make the 10th company much, much larger than the others. Armoured vehicles and vehicle crews are supplied to these companies a few different ways. The 4 battle companies, and often the 2 reserve battle line companies, tend to be assigned their own light transport vehicles as part of their company structure. A battle company would often hold enough rhinos, razorbacks, or impulsors to transport the entire company. The crew for those transport vehicles could be drawn from a number of different places. They could be a separate pool of drivers and gunners held within the company, or they could be drawn from the reserve battle line companies, or they could simply be servitors slave to the vehicles, all depending on the chapter's preference and resources. Anything heavier than that requires the involvement of the chapter's armoury, run by its tech marines. Tech Marines are Space Marines who, through Ancient Oath, have received years of cross-training by the Adeptus Mechanicus on either Mars or another nearby Forge world, and they're responsible for the maintenance, resupply and upkeep of the chapter's arms, armour and fighting vehicles. The armoury of any chapter is a busy place. It's industrial forges crewed by thousands of servitors and chapter serfs, all led by the Master of the Forge, the highest ranked Tech Marine in the chapter. As an organisation, the Armoury has custodianship over battle tanks, gunships, large war suits like the Invicta, larger and rarer transports like Land Raiders, and often any artillery pieces. These units are then supplied to companies and their deployments as needed, accompanied by Tech Marines that are assigned to tend them. These more complicated vehicles might be crewed by Tech Marine novitiates training in the Armoury, or else by specially trained battle brothers from the 9th Fire Support Company. Tech Marines in Codex-compliant chapters wear the red of Mars on their armour, usually adorned with the symbols of the Adeptus Mechanicus, though the left shoulder pad is kept in the standard colour scheme of the chapter. The Apothecarian is then another vital ingredient of a chapter that has its members spread throughout the companies. Apothecaries tend to the bodies of the Space Marines of the chapter, not only treating injuries, but creating and then maintaining the bodies of the Battle Brothers, implanting organs in neophytes and monitoring their progress, and administering the routine treatments every Space Marine needs to keep their genetic enhancements functioning well. The most vital battlefield task of apothecaries is the recovery of gene seed from dying Space Marines, which can then be grown into the implants needed to create their replacements. For this reason, many chapters operate a system where apothecaries are permanently assigned to the individual companies, and the apothecarian as a whole might have dozens of apothecaries of various grades. Apothecaries are trained within the chapter itself, often starting their career as Helix adepts in Vanguard squads before progressing to full company apothecaries, and the leader of the apothecarian holds the rank of chief apothecary. According to the Codex Astartes, apothecaries in any chapter should wear white armour with the left shoulder pad remaining in the standard chapter scheme. Just as the apothecarian administers to the bodies of the chapter, so the reclusiam administers to the Marine's spiritual needs. The reclusiam is the home of the chapter's chaplains, the keepers of the traditions, rites and beliefs of the chapter. Most Space Marine chapters deviate from the standard imperial orthodoxy in that they don't worship the Emperor as a god, but chapters still hold a huge and varied number of spiritual beliefs and traditions, often built around the veneration of the chapter's ancient heroes, collectively known as the chapter cult. Chaplains are the keepers of that cult. They conduct rites of initiation and indoctrination, ceremonies of remembrance and honour, and they watch over the Battle Brothers for any signs of spiritual or moral corruption. The reclusiam itself is home to the oldest and most sacred relics of the chapter, bestowed by the chaplains on honoured commanders before battle. Most Space Marines will have daily contact with their chaplain, and because of this, chaplains are often also directly assigned to companies, serving as close and valued advisors for the company captains. Neophyte chaplains might be selected in a number of different ways, but one is to take the path of the Judiciar, proving their valour in the fires of battle with an executioner's sword. Depending on the chapter, the head chaplain might be known as the Master of Sanctity, or more commonly the Reclusiarch, and the Codex dictates that chaplains are clad in black, again with the left shoulder pad remaining in the chapter's normal colours, and the armour of chaplains, as befits their status as holders of the relics, is often extremely ornate, with skulls and symbols of death very common. And finally, the Librarius is the home of the chapter's librarians, psychic Space Marines trained as powerful battle psychers. Any Space Marine neophytes that show psychic aptitude will often find themselves transferred to the Librarius, where they undergo a lifelong series of tests and trials as they progress through the organization's ranks, from an acolyte to a lexicanium, the lowest battlefield grade, through to then a codicea, and then an epistolary, with the highest ranked the chief librarian of the chapter. As well as being a psychic training facility, the Librarius is also an actual library. The librarians are responsible for the recording of the chapter's history and deeds, and the cataloguing and recording of information regarding the chapter's enemies, its dusty halls filled with tomes of ancient knowledge. In some chapters, the role of the Librarius has even been expanded to that of intelligence and covert operations, or maybe for prognostication and divination, depending on the culture of the chapter. And the Librarius also takes a very active role in recruitment, screening new aspirants for psychic corruption, while the Apothecarian tests for genetic deviancy. Librarians are rarer than many of the other support officers, and it's not unknown for chapters to petition or even raid black ships for new psychic recruits if their Librarius starts to dwindle. For this reason, librarians are rarely permanently attached to a company. Instead, they're attached to missions and individual deployments as required. Librarians in a Codex-compliant chapter wear blue armor, often augmented with psychic hoods, again leaving the left shoulder the chapter colour. All of these, both companies and specialist departments, are overseen by the high command of the chapter, led by the chapter master. The chapter master is a figure of immense authority in the Imperium, commonly serving also as the planetary governor for the chapter's homeworld, and they are given the sole authority to decide when and where the chapter will deploy. They're assisted in this by the leaders of the various support divisions and various other officers, both Astartes and mortal, raised to the rank of high command. The legions of old had a massive range of different officer ranks, generally termed consuls, that you might still find in specific chapters. Also in a lot of chapters, the chapter master maintains an elite honor guard force that are assigned to the chapter command level. In others, those honor guard might just be drawn from first company. Given all those supporting roles, it's pretty easy to see how a full-strength Space Marine chapter could easily exceed the nominal 1,000 Space Marines defined by the Codex. 10 companies of 100 warriors, plus maybe another dozen per company in command staff and specialists, the support divisions of the Apothecarian, Reclusiam, Forge and Librarius, command staff, and the many hundreds of novitiates in training could push a chapter far beyond those numbers, but that isn't generally considered a problem. In fact, some chapters exist that have always broken that rule. Their companies dispersed across the galaxy and their numbers pretty inconsistent. And of course, the fortunes of battle can take a toll. Many chapters are in fact far under strength. The only dictate that could see a chapter declared against would be outright legion building, the deliberate attempt to increase the chapter to a size far in excess of what's acceptable, such as happened with the Astral Claws in the lead up to the Badab War, who might have reached as strong as 3,000 or 4,000 Marines. And of course, all of that has so far ignored the many tens of thousands of mortal members of the chapter. Named serfs, helots, or merely slaves, depending on the chapter, the Astartes rely on a support staff of thousands to run the chapter, from preparing victuals or cleaning the arms and armour of Space Marines, to highly skilled servants working in the forges, poring over information in the Librarius, or searching for lost relics of the chapter on assignment from the Reclusiam. Whichever they are, each chapter runs on the backs of thousands of mortal staff. Depending on the chapter, these could be barely trained, impressed workers captured in raids, to honoured serfs and helots, their positions hereditary roles handed down for millennia on their homeworld. Some chapters, like the Blood Angels, recruit their serfs from failed neophytes, making sure that the recruits will still be able to serve the chapter in some way. Others, such as the Iron Hands, just prefer servitors, servitorizing any of their own failed aspirants. And in others, like the Mentor Legion, each individual Marine has a staff of serfs who monitor and assist remotely when he fights, even trained and augmented to be capable of taking to the battlefield alongside him if required. One of the largest populations of serfs a chapter maintains will be within the fleet. Each chapter has its own force of specialist spacecraft designed to deliver the chapter to its mission, and the vast majority of crew of those vessels will be mortal serfs. Though the fleet is nominally under the command of the 4th captain, and it's not uncommon for injured or partially skilled Astartes to take on positions as masters of its capital ships, the vast majority of shipmasters and captains are mortal, drawn from the population of the chapter homeworld or void-born on the chapter ships. All of this can be really varied, with even Codex-compliant chapters having considerable leeway over their interpretation of the Codex's strictures. Actual deployments of Space Marine forces might feature elements of many of the companies, maybe a battle company providing the core force, but augmented by a detachment of 10th Company scouts and 1st Company veterans, reinforcements from some of the battle companies. Some particularly wide-ranging chapters issue the use of the 1st and 10th Companies altogether. Chapters like the Carcharodons or the Sons of Medusa, whose companies often operate for long periods of time far away from the rest of the chapter, might run every single company as a battle company, with each company seeing to its own recruitment and maintaining its own veteran elite. Other chapters might have parallel structures that run alongside the ones in the Codex, like the Exorcist system of Orison cults, or they might have different systems of high command, like the clan councils of the Iron Hands and their successors. The most commonly seen variation is in insignia and in rank markings. The Raven Guard, for example, have companies that are led by shadow captains, who have considerably more leeway than many normal company captains to choose their own assignments. They only display their company colour on one pauldron, denote veterans and captains with a white helmet, but don't use the red helm for sergeants. The White Scars, on the other hand, dispense with company colours altogether. Companies are called brotherhoods in the chapter, are led by Khans, and company and squad assignments are determined by tribal markings applied to the armour of the squad sergeant and the knee pads of the battle brothers. Even some of the most hardline Codex-compliant chapters, like the Red Scorpions, who venerate the Codex Astartes as a holy document, still deviate in their interpretation of it, using the ranks of Commander and Lord Commander in place of Captain and Chapter Master, and fielding a far higher proportion of apothecaries than in many other chapters. The Codex Astartes is a colossal document that covers everything from rank, organisation to approved camo schemes, but the ideal chapter organisation it lays out only really exists as a set of guidelines. There are many chapters, certainly amongst the newer ones, who find it to be a respected, even holy document and stick to it very closely, but they're far outnumbered by the ones who take much of its teachings to heart, but deviate in some idiosyncratic way that suits them better. And of course, while this might be considered the standard way a Space Marine chapter is organised, there are, of course, chapters out there who do whatever they want and organise themselves however they wish. The universe is a very big place, and there are more than 1,000 chapters of Space Marines to choose from. So while the Codex Astartes is considered incredibly important, you can organise your Space Marines however you want. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like another video about the lore of 40k, there should be something popping up just there to the right. But in the meantime, if you'd like to support the channel, you can hit the like and subscribe buttons, that's always helpful, or look in the description below for links to affiliates, or go to the merch store. There should be a few products linked below, but if you go to the website, there's even more to pick from. See ya!